My name is Ryan Vance. At 48 years old, I have spent a lifetime learning that business is not about transactions, but about trust. Yet 4 months ago, I had to stand in a silent conference room and watch my supervisor destroy what she thought was nothing but a collection of spreadsheet notes. Victoria Sinclair stood behind my workstation, announced to our entire department that my year of effort was worthless garbage, and pressed the delete key while 28 of my colleagues stared. What she actually erased was the invisible foundation holding our company, Orion Analytics, together. In that single vindictive moment, she believed she was putting me in my place. What she actually did was dismantle the only barrier protecting Orion from a catastrophic collapse. 24 months ago, I joined Orion Analytics as their client relationship coordinator. The job description was dry. Maintain communication records, schedule follow-ups, and track client satisfaction metrics. What the hiring manager neglected to mention was that our firm was hemorrhaging major accounts faster than the executive board wanted to admit. The previous person in my position had lasted exactly 6 months before quitting without notice, leaving behind a chaotic mess of neglected folders, unanswered client emails, and disgruntled clients who felt completely ignored by our corporate structure. My supervisor, Victoria Sinclair, made it clear from my first day that she considered my role unnecessary overhead. She was a devotee of the modern, hyper-efficient corporate school of thought. To her, business was purely transactional. You send an invoice, you deliver the service, you collect the payment, and you repeat. The idea that clients might want an actual human connection was foreign to her way of thinking. She wanted every call to be under 5 minutes, every email to follow a rigid corporate template, and every interaction to be logged as a cold data point. But I saw something entirely different. When I reviewed our client history, I found page after page of dry communication logs that read like robot conversations. There was no personality, no warmth, and no indication that anyone at Orion had ever bothered to learn anything personal about the clients. So, I started treating our clients like actual human beings. When Harvey Hutchins, who ran a mid-sized manufacturing company, mentioned during a routine check-in call that his golden retriever had just been diagnosed with severe hip problems, I made a small note. 5 days later, I followed up with him to ask how the veterinary specialist's treatment was going. He was so surprised that someone from a corporate analytics firm remembered his dog that he spent 20 minutes telling me about the rehabilitation process. From that day on, Harvey would only speak to me. He ignored our main office line and dialed my desk directly, trusting me to handle his business because I had listened to him as a person. When Beatrice Campbell celebrated her textile company's 15th anniversary, I sent a personalized message congratulating her on navigating 15 years of industry shifts and asked about her plans for sustainable manufacturing. That personal touch led her to schedule an additional consultation session that brought in $18,000 of unexpected revenue for Orion. I simply listened when people shared pieces of their lives, remembered what mattered to them, and followed up in ways that showed I actually cared about their success. Victoria never understood what I was doing. She would walk past my desk, see me typing what looked like casual notes, and I could feel her disapproval. During our monthly reviews, she would flip through my activity reports with visible frustration. She asked why I was spending 50 minutes on calls that should take 20. She argued that efficiency metrics showed I was processing fewer interactions per hour than optimal. I tried explaining that these longer conversations were building stronger relationships, that clients were specifically requesting to work with me on new projects, and that our client retention rate had improved by 42% since I started. But Victoria only cared about numbers that fit her narrow formulas. The breaking point came during our annual strategic planning meeting. Our Chief Executive Officer, Julian Foster, was reviewing overall department performance when he noted that client retention had reached an all-time high. He specifically praised our relationship management approach and suggested expanding the personal touch strategy across other departments. I watched Victoria's face tighten. The credit for the improved retention was landing squarely on the methods she had spent months criticizing. After the meeting, she assigned me to complete a comprehensive audit of all client interactions over the past year, demanding detailed documentation of every communication and relationship-building effort I had made. It was intended as a punishment, a massive mountain of bureaucratic busy work designed to pull me away from the clients and exhaust me. But I approached the audit with the same attention to detail that I brought to my relationship work. I created a 62-page report showing not just what communications had occurred, but how those interactions translated into direct business outcomes. I documented the referrals Harvey had generated, the expanded services Beatrice had purchased, and the early contract renewals Alan Brooks had signed because he trusted our partnership. The finished audit was solid proof that personal attention to client relationships was directly responsible for over $250,000 in additional revenue, which made what happened next even more devastating. Victoria called an all-hands department meeting on a Tuesday morning. She announced that we needed to review our client communication protocols and that my audit would serve as a case study. I assumed she was finally ready to acknowledge the value of my work. Instead, she had me display my audit files on the main conference screen. Then, in front of 28 of my coworkers, she began tearing it apart. She presented my personal notes as evidence of unprofessional boundary violations. She claimed that chit-chat about pets and hobbies had no place in corporate communications. Finally, she pulled up the database containing my entire year of work. Her hand hovered over the keyboard. She announced that beginning today, we would return to efficient, professional protocols. And then she pressed delete, erasing a year of my effort in a single second. I sat there in the silence, watching my work disappear. But she had no idea she had just signed her own professional eviction. The silence in the conference room was so heavy, you could hear the hum of the overhead projector. My colleagues stared at their desks, refusing to make eye contact with me or Victoria Sinclair. She stood by the screen with a smug, satisfied expression, clearly believing she had just asserted her absolute dominance. She expected me to sit there, accept the public humiliation, and spend the next few weeks rebuilding my database according to her sterile templates. She thought she had stripped me of my influence and left me with no choice but to conform to her rigid standards. But Victoria had made a massive error. She had destroyed the digital files, but she could not destroy the trust I had built with the people behind those client accounts. And as it turned out, I did not have to wait long to prove it. While she was lecturing the room about corporate standards, my phone began vibrating in my pocket. The caller identification showed a number I recognized immediately. Owen Maxwell, a senior partner at Sumner Consulting, our main competitor. I stood up, walked out of the conference room without saying a word, and answered the call in the quiet hallway. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline of watching my work get erased. When I answered, Owen did not waste time. He told me that Sumner Consulting had been watching my work at Orion from afar. They had noticed our 42% increase in client retention and knew exactly who was responsible for it. He said they wanted to offer me the position of Director of Client Relations at Sumner. The offer was incredible, a base salary of $600,000 per year, equity participation, and complete autonomy to build their client relations department using my relationship-based philosophy. It was more than double my salary at Orion. But the most important part of the offer was the validation of my methods. Owen explained that they believed personal connection was the future of consulting, and they wanted me to lead that charge. They wanted a department built on empathy and trust, the exact qualities Victoria was trying to eliminate from Orion. He also made one thing clear. They knew I could not bring any proprietary database files or trade secrets from Orion due to legal agreements. But they also knew that client relationships were built on personal trust, not corporate databases. If clients chose to leave Orion because they preferred working with me, that was simply the natural consequence of Orion's management decisions. They wanted the person who built the goodwill, not the spreadsheets that recorded it. I took a deep breath, thanked Owen, and told him I accepted the offer. When I walked back into the conference room, Victoria was still speaking. She paused and asked if I was ready to commit to her new efficient communication guidelines. I looked at her, then at the blank screen where my 62-page audit had been displayed moments ago, and finally at CEO Julian Foster, who was sitting at the back of the room. I announced that I was resigning from Orion Analytics, effective immediately to join Sumner Consulting. The room went completely silent again, but this time the tension was directed entirely at Victoria. Her smug smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer confusion. She stammered that I could not just resign in the middle of a department meeting, pointing out notice requirements and transition protocols. I smiled calmly and looked at Julian Foster. I explained that my employment contract allowed for immediate resignation in the event of a work environment of a hostile or professional misconduct. Having my year of documented work deleted in front of 28 colleagues, while being falsely accused of unprofessional conduct, met both criteria perfectly. Furthermore, under state labor law, Victoria's public destruction of my work constituted a constructive discharge. I also pointed out a more serious issue. By intentionally deleting the primary client relationship database, Victoria had destroyed a critical corporate asset. I noted that her actions might violate the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act under Title 18, Section 1030 of the United States Code, since she intentionally accessed a protected computer to destroy data without authorization, causing significant financial damage to the company's client records. Julian Foster stood up, his face pale. He tried to defuse the situation, suggesting we step into his office to discuss a resolution and a potential raise. He was beginning to realize the legal and financial implications of Victoria's anger, but I was done. Victoria wanted to humiliate me publicly, so she could watch the consequences unfold publicly. I told Julian that my decision was final, gathered my personal items, and walked out the door. Within 48 hours, I had completed my exit paperwork and moved into my new office at Sumner Consulting. The contrast was night and day. The leadership at Sumner welcomed me with enthusiasm, giving me the resources to build a client relations strategy focused on genuine human connection. I did not have to worry about cold efficiency metrics or rigid call duration limits. They wanted me to treat clients like partners, not invoices. But the most satisfying part of the transition was watching Victoria's professional world begin to crumble under the weight of her own decisions. I had signed a strict non-solicitation agreement, which meant I could not reach out to any Orion clients. I complied with the law completely, leaving their contact info behind. I simply updated my professional profile online and waited. The clients I had spent 2 years supporting did not need me to call them. They knew where to find me, and they were already looking for a way out of Orion's sterile environment. The true test of my relationship-based business philosophy began just 5 days after I started my new role at Sumner Consulting. I was sitting at my desk, organizing my new workspace and reviewing Sumner's service lines, when my office phone rang. The caller identification displayed Hutchins Manufacturing. I picked up the receiver, and Harvey Hutchins' familiar voice filled the line. Harvey congratulated me on my new position, explaining that he had seen my update on a professional networking site. He then got straight to the point. He told me that Victoria Sinclair had called him the previous day for a routine client check-in. He said the call lasted less than 3 minutes and felt like talking to an automated billing system. Victoria had read from a script, asked about transaction codes, and completely ignored him when he tried to mention his dog's health or his factory's upcoming expansion plans. Harvey told me that he did not appreciate being treated like a number on a spreadsheet. He said he had built his own business by listening to his customers, and he expected his consulting partners to do the same. He asked if Sumner Consulting could handle his accounts, saying he would rather pay a firm that valued his business enough to listen to him. We spent the next 40 minutes discussing his manufacturing needs and coordinating a meeting to transition his business. By the time we hung up, I had secured Sumner's first major account from Orion, all because Victoria refused to spend 5 minutes listening to a loyal client. That afternoon, I received a call from Beatrice Campbell. She told me that she had also received a cold, templated email from Victoria's department, followed by a brief, demanding phone call about contract renewal rates. Beatrice was insulted by the lack of personal attention, especially since we had discussed her company's 15th anniversary plans just weeks prior. She explained to me that the email she received was so generic, it did not even address her by her name, but rather referred to her as a client identifier code. She told me that she had been working with consulting firms for 14 years, and I was the only coordinator who ever made her feel like her business mattered. She asked to move her textile accounts to Sumner immediately, stating she would not renew her agreement with a firm that treated her like transaction history. We discussed her future plans for over 30 minutes, ensuring she felt respected as a business partner. By the end of my first week at Sumner, 6 of Orion's largest clients had reached out to me. Every single one of them expressed frustration with Victoria's new efficiency-focused communication protocols. They felt ignored, undervalued, and alienated by the cold, transactional approach she had implemented. They did not want to deal with a department that treated them like data points. They wanted a relationship built on trust, and they were willing to move their business to get it. They wanted to speak to someone who remembered their names, their challenges, and their goals. Sumner's account onboarding team worked diligently to make the transition seamless for these clients, showing them immediate warmth and professional respect. Meanwhile, back at Orion Analytics, the departure of these major accounts was starting to create a massive crisis. I heard from former colleagues that Victoria was in a state of growing panic. She could not understand why the clients were leaving. In her mind, she was running a highly efficient department. She had reduced call times, standardized email templates, and cut down on what she considered wasted hours. Yet, the company was losing accounts faster than ever. She blamed the clients for being old-fashioned, refusing to see that her efficiency metrics were actively destroying customer loyalty. Her panic turned to desperation, leading her to make a critical error in judgment. She decided to call Alan Brooks, the owner of a major bookstore chain and one of Orion's most loyal clients. Alan had been calling me directly for over a year, and he had already initiated the process to move his business to Sumner. When Victoria realized she was about to lose Alan's account, she tried to convince him to stay. But instead of listening to his concerns, she did exactly what she always did. She argued with him. She told him that his decision to leave Orion was emotional rather than professional. She argued that business decisions should be based on service metrics and technical analytics, not on personal chit-chat about vintage novels or university courses. Alan was furious. He told her that he had built his own business on personal relationships and that he would not be lectured by a manager who did not understand the basic principles of customer respect. He told her that consulting is a relationship business, and if she could not understand that, she had no business managing client accounts. He hung up the phone and immediately sent a formal termination notice to Orion, ending their contract of 12 years. Victoria's rigid adherence to her corporate dogma was actively driving clients away. She believed that loyalty was tied to the Orion brand name, but she was learning that loyalty is actually a personal bond between human beings. When she deleted my audit files, she thought she was removing useless documentation. What she actually deleted was the only record of the personal connections that kept our clients from looking elsewhere. Without that foundation, the accounts were free to drift away, and they were drifting straight to Sumner. By the end of my first month at Sumner Consulting, the shift in the market was undeniable. 19 former Orion clients had officially terminated their agreements and transitioned their business to our firm. These were not minor accounts. They represented over 65% of Orion's annual consulting revenue. Sumner was experiencing an unprecedented period of growth, while Orion was facing the worst client retention crisis in its history. The industry was beginning to notice the sudden migration of business, and Orion's stock value was starting to reflect the revenue loss. The financial impact on Orion was devastating. I learned from my industry contacts that CEO Julian Foster had called an emergency board meeting to address the sudden loss of revenue. The company was facing the prospect of massive budget cuts, staff layoffs, and the potential sale of their regional offices just to remain solvent. The board was demanding answers, and Victoria was running out of excuses. During the meeting, which lasted for several hours under intense pressure, board members questioned her repeatedly about the sudden departure of the accounts. They pointed out that client complaints were directly tied to the cold communication protocols she had forced upon them. Victoria sat in the hot seat, sweating as her metrics failed to explain the loss of millions of dollars in recurring contract value. One director noted that average call duration was down by 50%, but customer termination notices had spiked by 200%. During the meeting, Victoria Sinclair attempted to deflect blame. She accused me of violating my non-solicitation agreement and stealing proprietary client data. She argued that there was no way Sumner could have acquired so many accounts in 12 weeks without me using stolen databases. She demanded that the company take legal action against me and Sumner Consulting, claiming we were engaged in corporate espionage. She wanted the board to authorize a lawsuit immediately to stop the client drain and protect their proprietary interests. But Julian Foster and the corporate board were not fools. They instructed their legal team to conduct a thorough investigation before filing any lawsuits. They knew that an unfounded lawsuit would only bring negative publicity to a company already in crisis. The lawyers reviewed my exit records, my computer access logs, and the transition documentation for every client who moved to Sumner. They interviewed the transitioning clients directly, asking them why they had chosen to leave Orion. The client interviews confirmed exactly what I had been saying. Harvey Hutchins, Beatrice Campbell, and Alan Brooks all stated under oath that they had initiated contact with Sumner Consulting on their own. They explained that they had discovered my new position through public professional channels and chose to move their business because they valued my personal attention and did not trust Victoria's automated approach. Under common law, client goodwill belongs to the relationship builder, and clients have the absolute right to choose their service providers. The legal team warned the board that filing a lawsuit would be a costly mistake, as they had no evidence of trade secret theft. They made it clear that clients are not corporate property, and their loyalty cannot be legally enforced. The corporate lawyers explained that since the clients chose to transition their business voluntarily, there was no cause of action under the Federal Uniform Trade Secrets Act. They further noted that filing a meritless lawsuit against a competitor could expose Orion Analytics to counterclaims for tortious interference with business relationships and antitrust violations, which would only accelerate the company's financial downfall. They warned Julian that taking legal action in this situation would be a public relations nightmare, signaling to the entire market that Orion was in a desperate panic. The board members nodded in agreement, realizing that legal threats could not replace client loyalty. In fact, the investigation turned up something far more damaging to Victoria. During the audit of department records, the board's investigators discovered that Victoria had intentionally deleted the client relations database I had compiled. They realized that the 62-page report she destroyed was the only comprehensive record of client communication preferences, historical touchpoints, and relationship profiles. By deleting that database, Victoria had effectively blinded her own team, leaving them with no way to maintain the personal connections I had established. The board was furious. They realized that Victoria's actions constituted a clear breach of fiduciary duty. As a manager, she had a legal duty of care to protect the company's assets. By intentionally destroying a database that represented $250,000 of documented annual revenue, she had committed a willful dissipation of corporate assets. Her personal grudge had caused direct financial harm to the corporation she was paid to protect. Furthermore, the legal team pointed out that her public destruction of my work and her subsequent accusations had exposed Orion to a significant constructive discharge claim, which I had already documented. Victoria's attempt to humiliate me had not only cost the company its best talent, but it had also left them legally vulnerable and without a strategy to save their remaining accounts. The board's focus shifted from suing me to managing the crisis Victoria had created. They demanded that she explain why she had destroyed corporate property and why she had failed to retain a single major account. Her arguments about efficiency and corporate standards fell flat. The board did not care about average call times or standardized emails. They cared about the 65% drop in revenue. Victoria's career at Orion was effectively over, and she had written the ending herself. 4 months after my departure from Orion Analytics, I received a phone call from Julian Foster. He did not call to threaten legal action. His voice was tired and quiet as he asked if we could meet for a private lunch to discuss what he called a strategic partnership. He was a man who had watched his company's value evaporate in a matter of weeks, and he was looking for a lifeline. We met at a quiet Italian restaurant on the outskirts of the city, away from the eyes of our industry colleagues. Julian looked tired, his eyes shadowed with stress as he ordered his meal. He sat across from me, a shadow of the confident executive I had known for 2 years. His shoulders were slumped, and he seemed to have aged a decade since the day Victoria deleted my database. When we sat down, Julian got straight to the point. He admitted that Orion was in a terminal decline. They had lost too much revenue to recover, and the board had decided to restructure the company. He asked if Sumner Consulting would be interested in acquiring Orion's remaining client accounts and taking over their lease agreements. He was offering to hand over what was left of the company to our firm, realizing that they could no longer compete with our relationship-based business model. Then he made an unexpected proposal. He asked what it would take to bring me back to Orion. He offered me the position of Vice President of Client Relations, a significant salary increase, and complete authority over the entire service department. He admitted that the board had realized Victoria's efficiency-focused strategy was a failure, and they wanted me to rebuild the department using my relationship-based methods. They were willing to pay whatever it took to regain the client trust they had lost. I looked at Julian and felt a deep sense of validation, but no desire to return. I told him that I appreciated the offer, but I had to decline. I explained that Sumner Consulting had supported my philosophy from my first day, rather than waiting for a financial crisis to recognize its value. I was building a successful department at Sumner, and I had no interest in trying to revive a company that had allowed my work to be deleted. I told him that trust cannot be rebuilt on the ruins of a broken philosophy, and that I could not work for an organization that valued metrics over human connections. Julian listened in silence, nodding slowly as he accepted my decision, realizing that Orion's fate had been sealed the moment they chose to delete my work. He sighed deeply, settled the invoice for our lunch, and thanked me for my honesty. He sat in silence for a moment, looking at his hands, before admitting that their failure to recognize the value of client relationships had cost them everything. He realized that Victoria's spreadsheet models had ignored the most basic element of commerce: human trust. We finished our meal in relative quiet, and as we parted, I felt a sense of closure. Shortly after our meeting, the acquisition went through. Sumner Consulting acquired Orion's remaining assets, and Orion was merged into a larger firm. As part of the merger, 35% of the staff was laid off, and their main office building was closed. The transition was smooth, and we were able to integrate the remaining accounts into our system without any service disruptions, applying our relationship-focused model to the clients who had been neglected under Orion's old management. My former colleagues who transitioned to Sumner expressed immense relief at escaping the toxic environment Victoria had created. They were thrilled to work in an atmosphere where client satisfaction was celebrated rather than punished. Victoria Sinclair was not retained during the merger. Her contract was terminated immediately, and she was left without a job. Because the client retention crisis had occurred under her direct supervision, her professional reputation in our industry was ruined. Potential employers who contacted Orion for references were informed of the massive revenue loss and the destruction of the client relations database. She was unable to secure a comparable management position, and I heard she had to leave the consulting field entirely to find work 8 months after leaving Orion. I was promoted to senior partner at Sumner Consulting. I now oversee client relationship strategies across 3 regional offices. The 19 clients who followed me have become the foundation of our most successful year, helping us build a business that values people over metrics. I designed training programs that teach our coordinators how to listen actively, how to remember client milestones, and how to build authentic partnerships. I show them that our growth is not a result of aggressive sales pitches, but the natural consequence of client loyalty. Our success has proven that the personal touch is not inefficient overhead, but the most powerful asset a firm can possess. I spend my days working with partners who understand that business is a human endeavor and that the strongest contracts are built on mutual respect. Looking back, 3 years after Victoria deleted my work, I realized that the most elegant revenge did not require an elaborate plan. I did not have to sabotage the company or attack my supervisor. All I had to do was stand up for my value, step aside, and let the natural consequences of Victoria's decisions unfold. Her own arrogance and rigid adherence to a flawed philosophy were the only weapons needed to destroy her career. In the end, she deleted her own future, while I built a better one. Sometimes, the best way to defeat your enemies is simply to let them succeed in their own destruction while you succeed elsewhere. The best revenge is living well and building a business where people actually matter. Our success at Sumner is proof that empathy is the ultimate corporate asset.